we uncover the legend of one of the most haunting tales from the Lone Star State. For over 2 decades, dozens of women and girls were found dead along an isolated stretch of land just south of Houston. Join us as we uncover the dark history of the Texas killing fields. The city of Houston, Texas, is the 4th largest city in the U.S., but within its history lies a dark and haunting mystery. Over the course of 2 decades, more than 30 women and girls were found dead in isolated fields and bayous between Houston and Galveston. Many of these horrific murders remain unsolved to this day. When an unidentified serial killer made this area his chosen dumping ground, the case gained national attention. This is the chilling tale of the Texas killing fields. Our story begins just 20 miles south of Houston, off Interstate 45. Here lies the League City oil field, a remote, desolate stretch of land between bustling Houston and the shores of Galveston Island. This area was once dotted with oil rigs, but by the 1970s, as the oil wells dried up, the fields were left abandoned. This abandoned landscape, largely covered with trees and home to many lakes and bayous, became an ideal dumping ground for killers to discard the bodies of their victims. The area was remote enough to provide cover, and the terrain and climate ensured that any evidence left behind would quickly decompose. For over 2 decades, this area became the final resting place for dozens of young women and girls. The first documented killing was Brenda K. Jones, a 14-year-old who went missing on July 1st, 1971. Brenda was on her way to visit her aunt in the hospital in Galveston, but never arrived. The next day, her body was found floating in Galveston Bay. Brenda's tragic death marked the start of a gruesome era of murders and disposals that would last more than 20 years. Just a few months later, 2 more teenagers, Debbie Catherine Ackerman and Maria Talbot Johnson, vanished while hitchhiking to Houston. An eyewitness saw the teens being picked up by a man in a white van in Galveston. 2 days later, their bodies were found, tied up, and discarded in Turner's Bayou. Then, only days later, the skeletal remains of 19-year-old Gloria Ann Gonzalez were discovered in the same area. These murders were just the beginning. In the early 1970s, young women continued to vanish, their bodies often found in fields, bayous, or lakes between Houston and Galveston. Each time, families were left grieving, and authorities were left with little to no leads. Given how many transient and migrant workers passed through the I-45 corridor, it was believed that most of these victims had been murdered by criminals who happened to be passing through. Only a few rare cases were ever solved, and the differences in victimology and cause of death pointed to multiple suspects rather than a single killer. This all changed when the bodies of 4 women were discovered in the area just off Calder Road. These killings became known as the Calder Road killings, and thanks to national media coverage, this specific case is synonymous with the story of the Texas killing fields. The 4 Calder Road victims all shared physical similarities, and their cause of death and the location of their bodies pointed to a single suspect being responsible for their murders. The first known victim of the Calder Road killings was found in 1983. She was never identified and was nicknamed Janet Doe by investigators. Then, just 1 year later, 25-year-old 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎 disappeared. She was last seen at a convenience store payphone in League City. Months later, her skull was found in the same field where Janet Doe had been left. The following year, 16-year-old Laura Lynn Miller went missing from the same payphone where Heidi was last seen. Somewhere along her walk home, Laura disappeared. Investigators initially believed Laura had willingly run away from home, but her parents insisted otherwise. Laura's father heard about what had happened to Heidi, and after months of pushing authorities to search the fields, her remains were eventually discovered there in 1986, just 60 feet from where Heidi was found. While searching for evidence in Laura Miller's murder, police discovered the remains of yet another unidentified female victim, who they referred to as Jane Doe. 4 women, 2 unidentified, each brutally brutally murdered and disposed of in the same field. The local police, with assistance from the FBI, attempted to connect the dots or find a suspect. Their evidence suggested that the murderer was likely a local resident of the area. Over the years, several suspects have emerged in connection to the Texas killing fields and the Calder Road murders. One of the most prominent suspects, 𝖒𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆, confessed to several murders while in prison. However, authorities could find no hard evidence to connect him directly to any of the killings, and as such, he was never charged. Michael Lloyd Self, another suspect, confessed to the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. However, he later recanted his confession, claiming he'd been tortured by police. Although he was convicted, many believe his confession was forced. Another suspect in the Calder Road cases, 𝖘𝖊𝖉𝖎𝖆, was convicted of an unrelated murder but never charged with any of the Calder Road killings. He was formerly a neighbor to the Miller family. After his release from prison, Laura Miller's father filed a wrongful death lawsuit that held 𝖊𝖉𝖎 civilly responsible for Laura's death. Laura's father won the case, but 𝖊𝖉𝖎 was never held criminally responsible for any of these killings. In recent years, advances in DNA technology have helped shed light on parts of this mystery. In 2019, after years of waiting, the two previously unidentified bodies found on Calder Road were identified. The first, Janet Doe, was confirmed to be Audrey Lee Cook, a 30-year-old mechanic from Houston who disappeared in 1985. The other, Jane Doe, was identified as 34-year-old Donna Gonsolin Prudhomme, a mother last seen in 1991. Though their identities have finally been given back to them and their families have been given some closure, the question remains: who took their lives? This day, the case remains unsolved. Just recently, in August of 2024, one of the primary suspects in these killings, 𝖘𝖊𝖉𝖎, spoke with KPRC2, a Houston news station, as part of their program The Evidence Room. The episode aired in October 2024. 𝖊𝖉𝖎 maintained his innocence, sharing that he was exhausted with having to continually defend himself. But for the families of the victims, especially Laura's father, Tim Miller, who has fought tirelessly for justice, the suspicion remains. Was 𝖘𝖊𝖉𝖎 the monster behind the Calder Road murders? Or is the true killer still walking free, never to be held responsible for his crimes? The investigation into the Texas killing fields is ongoing, and the case remains open with the League City Police Department and the FBI. Today, a church sits near the location where the Calder Road victims were found. Behind the church rests a memorial to the 4 women who tragically lost their lives at the hands of a still unidentified monster. I had the opportunity to visit the Texas killing fields and the memorial for the Calder Road victims. Much of the area is still remote woodland, houses and businesses sprinkled throughout. There are signs posted at the memorial site with photos of the victims and the primary suspect, 𝖘𝖊𝖉𝖎. Small grave sites stand in memory of the victims, with benches placed nearby, each inscribed with a loving testament to the mothers, sisters, and daughters who were taken. Visitors to the site leave coins, jewelry, and flowers to pay their respects. At the time of my visit, there were several bundles of fresh flowers, indicating that though these women may be gone, they are far from forgotten. Looking out from the memorial, there were overgrown fields, twisted thickets of trees, and in the distance, a rundown shed. The gloomy, overcast sky added a somber touch to the sight of such great tragedy. Peering into the trees, I could see no further than a few feet in. There was a dark and haunting ambiance to the location, even putting aside the memorials that stood behind me. Even today, the area is far enough away from the main roads and businesses that I doubt anyone could have heard me scream. It was a chilling experience, to say the least, but fortunately for me, I walked out of there alive. The same cannot be said for Audrey, Heidi, Donna, and Laura, whose loving memory touched me during my visit. I was grateful for the opportunity to pay my respects to these women, who may never get the justice they deserve. The tale of the Texas killing fields has haunted the nation. The lives of over 30 girls and women were cut short, and most of these families have grieved without ever knowing who took the lives of their loved ones. With so much time passed since these killings, we may never have an answer to this horrific mystery. For now, the story of the Texas killing fields remains yet another tale from the underworld. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Underworld. If you're fascinated by the stories we uncover, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. For even more exclusive content, head over to our website at talesfromtheunderworld.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You'll get insider access to deeper case details, early updates on new episodes, and more true crime content sent straight to your inbox. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay out of the shadows.